Welcome to selfdiscoverymedia.com, where we discover the communities that are making a difference in the lives of others. Our self-discovery is something we are all making on our life's journey. Here you will find the people that will be your guidance, that will be your inspiration, that will be there for you in support on your journey of life. Do enjoy. Our next show is... Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of not Sarah's View of Life. No, it is our mental health awareness show right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. I'm your host, Sarah Troy, and my guest is Brad Schaeffer. I do have a cold, folks. Sorry if I sound a little bit congested here, but the show must go on, especially when we have such a good show that we're going to be talking about today. It's the extraordinary. He tackles two sensitive subject matters, autism and post-traumatic stress disorder. How does that come together? Autism, we've done a number of shows on those. From my point of view, autism are beautifully gifted people that just communicate on a different level. Sometimes we need to go into their world, not always demand they come into us. Post-traumatic stress disorder, there's a lot of people with that, and especially right now with the pandemic. But The Extraordinary is about a teenage boy in the autistic spectrum, narrates his struggles coping with a chaotic and scary world when his Marine Corps father returns from Iraq, debilitated by injury and post-traumatic stress disorder. Brad is going to talk to us about how the suicide of his father, who suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder after returning from the war, has influenced his writing and his story. That is quite an intro there, Brad, of unfortunately a story far too much told of people coming back from war and the post-traumatic stress disorder just not being taken seriously, and sometimes the only way out they see is suicide. And it's got nothing to do with the love of their family or anything else. It's just like, don't know how to cope with life. And, and autism, well, as I said, as I think is, for many people, I've interviewed some extraordinary people with autism who really are so incredibly gifted. It's just operate on a different level than most people do. So putting the two together, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Very kind of you.
It's, as I said, the two of them together is not normally a show that I would do, but how does an autistic child deal with not only the post-traumatic stress disorder, because autism don't like things out of order,
Right.
things,
Right.
Kind of somewhat on the level, don't want things that reach too many heights, or too many lows, like to keep an equilibrium. And, to have a father with post-traumatic stress disorder, and whichever way it manifested is going to upset the equilibrium of an autistic child.
Right. Absolutely. Also, even part of the book covers a little bit about the stresses on families when the patriarch or the matriarch, whoever wears the uniform, goes away and goes off to a foreign place. And as people who have parents who travel or whatnot know, it's difficult enough when they're away and you're young. But then they're also in a dangerous situation where they may not come home.
Right.
And so that is a very so for anybody that's a difficult that's a difficult hurdle to overcome just in your daily life. But then on top of that, in my particular book, I tried to overlap that with an issue I care about, which is autism. And I'm curious about it. And I try to figure out how somebody who in their teens would process something like this. I mean, I have some experience with the first part because even though I was born after my father came back from war, he went to the Korean War, he was a Marine. And as anybody who knows the history of the 1st Marine Division in Korea will tell you, that they were in the thick of it. I mean, my father was a combat veteran. He was wounded in action. He led a platoon. He saw men die under him. He told me some stories, which I won't tell you here because they're rather disturbing, but they are the stories that I think any warrior who's been in combat can tell. And, but I did watch him sort of slowly, his mental state debilitate over like the last really 15 years of his life, and which just happened to be the time when I was alive. I mean, it could have been going on for longer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that what Wes, the boy in the book who is autistic, is watching,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the emotions he's feeling, and not just him too, but his older brother Thomas and his older sister Rebecca. So there's really about a family too, told through the eyes of an autistic boy. And a lot of what I saw, I put into the book, and I think that's what kind of gives it some authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you overlap that with autism, you really have somebody who is almost on the outside looking in,
Mm-hmm.
because as you know, silence is certainly no indication of of debilitation. In
No.
fact, very often we find that autistic children happen to be some of the brightest,
Yes.
most astute, most sensitive, and sensitive in a good way. Sensitive in the sense that they're very aware of the world around them. And so I felt the best way to tell this story was through the eyes of really of an observer, even though he's embedded within the family itself. And the fact that his father and was the only one who really got him. So he was, like you talked about, that equilibrium of, he always had his father, and his father called him my extraordinary boy,
Mm.
and he called the boys who and girls who don't have autism. He sort of told them, he told Wes that they were the ords, the ordinary kids. So he's always trying to make his son feel special. And when he goes away, that really upsets Wes's world a bit, especially because he's left with a family that doesn't get him the way the father does.
Right.
And so there's a lot of emotional sinew going through this book. But I'd like to think that I hope that I tackled it properly and with the due respect of both subject matters that I was trying to entail.
I've interviewed a lot of veterans, and the veterans who openly admit post-traumatic stress is a part of their life.
Mhm.
And but the extraordinary thing about them was the fact that they knew what they were missing when they came home, and so it actually ignited them to create whatever
Mhm.
was missing, an organization, a system, or something that served others, other
Right.
veterans or other people with post-traumatic stress. And it served their families because they knew that they weren't being offered that, and only they know what
Right.
they need, right? And we look at post-traumatic stress disorder and we put this label up there, and we have this, stereotype of somebody troubled or somebody living on the
Mhm.
street or somebody going off the rails, or we see it in the movies all the time, people who've
Mhm.
kind of lost it. Some of the most together people I've interviewed and veterans with the post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's a constant navigation every single day because it's a constant repeat of the memories. And
Mhm.
even if they kind of look at those memories and manage to detach themselves from the pain or the anguish to it, they're there. And they
Right.
they filter always through into their lives all the time, whether they want it or not. It's not just a mind over matter thing, because it's
Exactly.
it's changed who they are, and they're not the same person that went away. And very often, rather like autism, they're misunderstood,
Right.
and so labeled and categorized, but not understood of the sensitivity that they live in, where autistic people or autistic children are the same thing. They live in a sensitivity. And so they're heightened to the sensitivity around them. So you can understand that they're probably both much the same on the same sensitive level.
That, and also there's a bit of a disconnect between them and the rest of the world. I
Yeah,
mean, autistic, they call it the spectrum, obviously, because there are so many.
different
It's
levels of it.
an
Mm,
infinite number of
yeah,
manifestations through it, and the one I created was a boy who is very introverted, very regiment oriented. Like he did the
yeah,
same thing every day, at the same time. He watched The Sound of Music every day. That was his thing, and he needed that. And but he was also extremely bright. And then you
right.
realize that the words that he's writing are, he's definitely speaking above a level normally, but of his age group, of a higher intellectual level. And at first, I thought that was unrealistic until I did some research. In fact, I
Mm,
think the CBS Sunday Morning actually had a story just coincidentally last week about an autistic gentleman who graduated from Harvard, and
mm-hmm,
he communicated through his tablet. Everybody, but you're very isolated in that, and that isolation is pretty obvious to see. You
Mm-hmm.
can see an autistic boy who's in his own world, or
Yeah.
I say boy, I mean it's usually it's more boys than girls, so I don't mean to be,
Right.
I'm just going to use the term boy just because the book is about a boy, but
You're right.
obviously this is
Yeah.
children, and but you can see that, right? You can see, you can look at that, and you realize that there's a separation between the two. But when you come back from war, you're being asked to go back into your previous life. You're
Mm-hmm.
being asked to, especially in modern war, where you almost have like no time to decompress. Like,
Right.
you hear stories, especially of Vietnam, where they say, 14 hours ago, I was in a rice paddy getting
Yeah.
shot at, and now
Yeah.
I'm at a Kmart.
Yeah.
My wife, with a list of things my wife is telling me to get,
Yeah.
is that and the problem is that you walk around, and the only people who can understand combat, and I've never been in it, so are the other people
Yes.
in combat, and very often they become they start to see the world as an us and the
Yeah.
rest of them. And
Yeah.
I think and before, it kind of gets to what you were saying before. In World War I, they called it shell shock.
Yes.
In World War II, they called it battle fatigue. Now we're starting to understand it more, and I think it's the fact that it's become less taboo.
Mm-hmm.
You've got more of these organizations, and I think they're very therapeutic, that have, and these people can get together and say, boy, I remember this, and I think the best way to deal with this is to talk it out. But you can't talk it out with your family. I mean,
No.
like, how could my father explain to me what it's like to be under a mortar attack or something? I have no idea. Or more importantly, seeing his friends die, people under his, and that's the worst part, is you see these people who you knew one minute were,
Yeah.
there, and the next minute they're not. It's such a disconcerting experience, and then being thrust back into peace,
Right.
where people start, a lot of the complaints that warriors have is, people are complaining about things that they shouldn't complain about. They complain
Right.
about the fact that somebody dented their car. Like, oh, that's great. Well, I just, I had
Yeah.
half my platoon wiped out in
Yes.
a, and so it's very hard for them. And I think what created this book in my mind is, I feel, and in a way, when you're a teenager and your father
Mm.
commits suicide, doesn't die in the quote unquote normal way,
Right.
you also kind of have that sense of an outsider.
Mm.
I mean, like my counselor would just, if I'm going off on tangents, by the way, please stop me. But
No, please go
um,
ahead.
well, there's a scene in the book where his counselor is talking to his older brother while West is sitting there, but he was listening to the conversation, and the older brother is a senior in high school, and the counselor is basically trying to tell him, look, you're not the only one who lost a parent. Maybe you should talk to these other people. But he's like, yeah, but I'm the only one whose father killed himself. Okay, so and so's dad died of a heart attack. Another
Yeah.
one, had a stroke. Another one had cancer. This is taboo, in a way.
Yeah.
Not so much now, but and he says, and the counselor says people aren't really sure how to speak to you,
Mm.
and they're not sure what to say to you. And I remember that I would walk through the halls. That was my junior year of high school. I went back to school, and I had good friends. I had a wonderful high school experience, but I do remember for a while those looks, not of, not of the looks of basically, how do we approach Brad now?
Yeah. Do we
What how,
pity him? Do we,
we
do
can't
we
say how
ignore it?
he's,
Yeah.
yeah, everybody's like, hey man, how was your summer? How was your summer? But they're not going to ask me how my summer was, because they know what happened in my
Yeah.
summer, in July. And so I think the kernels of my affinity for outsiders and people who are sort of, who are orbiting the world so much as being in it, I think that sort of began at that point. And this book really, it didn't take me long to write, but I think it almost took me a lifetime
Mm.
to consider,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I'd
Or how
like to
to
think it
articulate the actually emotions in there in a
yeah, yeah,
story
actually,
type
I
way.
wasn't a
Yeah.
good enough writer. If I had tried to write this in high school or college, it would have just been it would have not been very good. This is probably the fifth book that I've written, the second one that I've published. So, it's just like anything else. The more you do something, the better you get at it. But
But the more
yeah,
of, what really needs to come out comes out, and,
yes, yeah,
the fact that you have, drawn this as the autistic child going through this is that
mhm,
in a lot of ways, it's kind of how you felt, a little paralyzed, misunderstood. And, people don't know what to say to people when
right,
there's been a death at any level. Somebody's father dies of cancer, heart attack, or even right
Right.
now with COVID. Nobody knows what to say. And when somebody commits suicide, there is a stigma by it. Now,
Right.
it's considered the coward's way out by some people, right?
You
But
know who
we,
considered, I'm sorry to interrupt, you know who
yeah,
considered it the coward's way out at one point? My own
no,
father.
really?
Because yeah, I remember, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just
No,
remember a
no.
story. This actually I just remembered this now. When I was younger, I wanted to be a concert pianist, and I talked, and I want to say it was Rubinstein. I don't want to say it's the wrong guy. I don't want to, but there was one concert pianist who actually was so distraught that he tried to hang himself, and the rope broke. And I remember telling my father that story years before he died, and he always told me, you know, that's the coward's way out. You don't want to do that. So it tells you how powerful the mental illness is
Yes.
of that. So I apologize for
No, no,
interrupting. I
no.
just didn't want to forget that.
I'm glad you brought that up because
Mhm.
he himself looked at
Right,
it that way. Yet, how distraught did he have to be? How at the end of his tether? How
right,
where he just couldn't see a solution for tomorrow for him to
right,
finally take it, even though he had that judgment on it himself?
right. And the odd thing with him, like in my book, my character, Captain Peter Scott, is severely wounded and debilitated by wounds. My father was wounded in Korea, but he was not debilitated.
Mm-hmm.
He was able to have a full recovery. He lost part of his heel, and they actually sewed it back and all that. It's kind of a weird story, but you know, his problems were completely mental. It's not like he had lost his job. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like his wife had left him, or anything like that. You know, there was no triggering. You know, oh, that's too bad. You know, it's not like he lost all of his money in the markets or
Right.
anything like that. It's just that I think, you know, and people have always asked me, you know, well, how did you get over it? And I think, and this is good advice for a lot of people, I think, dealing with this. I look at it as the man. He was a loving father, all right, and you see that in the book. He was a loving husband. He was a good provider. He was one of the toughest men I ever met. He was a Marine lieutenant. You know, I mean, this was not a weak man. And the fact that he did that means that something in his brain
Yeah.
broke. He
Yeah.
almost had, you know, and it's a brain attack is the way I call it. And my attitude is, would I be upset had he had a heart attack or a
Mm,
stroke? Would
right.
I have been mad at that? No.
Yeah.
The problem is that in a way, I felt more sympathy for him because, you know, it's one thing, for instance, if you have a cancer, God forbid, at least you understand, okay, there's this
Yeah.
group of cells in my lymph nodes or wherever it is. We can attack it, whatever, but you know what's causing you the discomfort, and it's nothing in your own head.
Right.
It's an outside body. You know, it's an alien. It's an invader, right? But how do you combat your own mind?
Mm,
It's your mind that's attacking you. And I felt it's funny. I mean, I did have that period of anger. I think everybody goes through that, you know, but and it's a bit selfish because, you know, how could you leave me? I'm only 16, you know, and
right.
but after a while, my anger went from understanding to, I mean, I don't want to use the term pity because I don't think he would want that term, but
Right.
the poor, you know, anybody who does that, the strongest, the strongest instinct people have is survival,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so to override that, and to do it by your own hand is, you know, there's one thing if you give up your life, you know, to save your child.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but it just so for me, my attitude is for him to do that, something had to be terribly, terribly wrong, and the powerlessness is part of the problem too that you feel. It's like you
Why
don't know how
couldn't I
bad it
see it?
is.
Why couldn't I stop it?
Right.
Why
It's
didn't
not
I
like
see
you.
the signs? Yeah.
Right.
Why
It's not
wasn't
like you
I
can.
enough?
Well, that's what the in the book the mother is. You know, the son is saying the older son, the boy, is the most. He's the most resentful. He's the teenager, older than Wes. He's resentful of Wes for taking up all the air in the room because Wes
Mm,
demands a lot of attention because he has autism. But Wes is aware of this, and Wes is saying, you know, I don't think Thomas likes me, right?
mm,
But he's also very angry at his father for leaving him just as he's getting ready to embark on his life,
yeah.
and he could, you know, and you know, and the question is, you know, how and but also, you know, the wife is saying, you know, so he's saying to the mother, how could you not see the signs?
Mm,
You know, you were with the man for 35 years. How could
right.
you not know? And one of the things that you will hear people say a lot, and if anybody's watching this who has been through this, you might recognize this phrase, which is, I just didn't think they do it. You know,
Right.
I
All talk,
honestly
no
didn't think
action.
they
Hmm.
really do it.
Yeah.
And, you know, because people can talk about it, but
Yeah.
to actually go through it, and in a way where you want to do it. I'm not talking about, taking a pill and then leaving the
Right.
door open so
Yeah.
that somebody, it wasn't a cry for help. It was I'm out of this world.
I'm
Move.
exiting. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
but
And
I'm sorry, go ahead. Please
no,
go ahead.
it's a hard thing, to leave a 16-year-old. My brother was 16 when my father died, and my
Hmm.
father was, kind of a product of the Second World War. And
Hmm.
he was a squadron leader. When he came out of the squadron, there were only about two of them left. One sat down one day and said, "I'm tired," and just died. And my dad had a series of heart attacks.
Hmm.
The biggest mistake was the hospital telling me he only had a short time to live, because then he went back into battle mode. And he went, he drove fast, he drank fast, he did everything fast. And come on, death, come and get me.
Right, right.
And he died at 45. I was 11, my brother was 16, and my brother
Oh,
was
wow.
angry. My brother was angry at him. But the British way, suck it up, right?
Right,
Nobody
right,
talks about it. You don't talk about the horrors or anything else.
right.
And he had no outlet. So, of course, for
Hmm.
many, alcohol becomes outlet. Nowadays, drugs become outlet, um, because there is nowhere else to go. And the more we invite people under any form of stress to talk about it, to feel supported, they're not alone. This is not a judgment call. We
Right.
know you're going through something. We may not understand it, but we're there to support you. I think if my dad had had that, he may have fought for his life, because if he changed the diet and changed his lifestyle, we may still have him today.
Yeah,
But it was almost, he was, "Come on, death, come and get me then." And
yeah,
we felt, but weren't we enough? Weren't we enough for you to fight for life? And I
right.
think at that point, there was just too much death in his life,
Mhm.
that he didn't have enough life in his life, if you know what I mean, to fight for.
That's a good phrase, actually. I may have to borrow that.
You go ahead.
You know, well, I mean, to willingly leave the people you love behind
Yeah.
is not a rational act.
No.
It's the act of somebody who is, like you said, they've just kind of given up,
Hmm.
and I think at that point the brain is taken over,
Yeah.
and there are the insidious thing about depression, and I've fought it off and on. And the worst thing about it, and I think a lot of people who suffer it, is that, I mean, Don Henley said the creative impulse comes from the dark side of the personality.
Hmm.
So I think if I was totally hunky dory, I wouldn't be able to write what I
Right.
write. So there's
Yeah.
always, but it's that you can draw a matrix and you can write down on paper, and you can mathematically, I do commodities trading too. I can mathematically prove that everything's great,
Right.
and yet you're like, yet why do I feel like this? It makes no sense, and that's, I
It's
think,
not an intellectual
it's
thing.
not an intellectual thing,
It's
and
just
I
a
think,
feeling of despair. Someone's come into your stomach and
right,
just pulled your heart out.
right, and I think that once I crossed from believing this was an intellectual
Mm,
decision, where he looked at the plus side and the minus
right.
side and decided that we on the plus side didn't outweigh the minus side, and once I realized that he knew well about the plus side and it didn't matter because
Right.
he was under the control of something else. And and that's the way mental illness is. Mental illness is basically you're being attacked from within.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether or not, I'd like to think that this was 1983. I moved the book up to Iraq to make it
Mm,
more contemporary. Um, but I'm 54, and this was when he was 16 when he passed. But I'd like to think that had drugs been available like they are today, and I don't mean like Paxil or something like that,
yeah.
I wonder if that would have helped. But I don't know. There's one thing to feel depressed and tired. It's another thing to come back from a combat zone.
Yeah.
And so one of my favorite books is a historical books is a book written by a Marine private named Eugene Sledge called "With the Old Breed," and he was at Okinawa and Peleliu, two of the worst battles of the Marine Corps,
Mm-hmm.
and he had nightmares for
Mm-hmm.
years after. And finally, his family told him to write everything down. Maybe that would help, and it turned out to be one of the best memoirs of writing of
Mm-hmm.
World War II ever. I wish my father had done that too, because
Yes.
he was a wonderful writer. I mean, he's the one who instilled in me the interest in writing. When I was a little kid, he used to sit down with me and read Zane Grey books and stuff like that, just to get me interested in writing. And I think so. I do owe him that. But so I just think looking back, hindsight's always wonderful. You can
Oh,
always look
yes, it
back
is.
and say,
Yes, we can always
you know,
solve everything with hindsight. Yeah.
right,
Uh,
right. If you'd taken your dad's car keys away, or whatever,
yeah,
hid
exactly.
hid the hid the scotch bottle,
Yeah.
whatever it was, but it doesn't matter. I
No.
mean, but you said something earlier that I really liked. You said in your intro, you said very often we demand they come into our world where we
Mm,
should be trying to get into theirs. I
yes.
really like that, and I think that applies to both subjects of the
Both
book.
subjects.
You know,
With autistic people, they just express themselves very differently. They're not
they do.
unintelligent, and they're generally quite brilliant, but it's just they navigate on a different channel. And if we actually went into their channel instead of
Yes,
demanding, you are inferior because you're not in my channel. No,
right.
it's like step into their channel and you'll see how bright and how intuitive and, how much they've got to give.
Oh, I,
It's wonderful. I've interviewed quite a number of people who are autistic or parents of
mhm,
autistic children, and they've gone on to write books and do this and that because of the encouragement from their parents who
right,
believe in them. But they had to go through all the other stuff that comes with autism as well. The
right,
fits and the everything else. So it's not hunky dory, no.
right,
But because when they get frustrated and they don't know how to communicate, they play up, and the playing up can be sometimes quite,
right.
you know, um, sometimes
Well,
even quite bizarre, but
right. Well, look,
isn't that the same with post-traumatic stress,
right. Well, look, I know what like I have a temper like a lot of people, and what draws my temper out is not like it's not if let's say I'm walking down the street and somebody steps on my foot, that never bothers me.
Hmm.
But if I say, "Pardon me, you stepped on my foot," and that they look down at you and they say, "No, I didn't," like
Yes,
because
just
well, I'm like,
own
"Well,
it,
I just
man,
saw you
own
do
it.
it," and,
Yeah,
and, and and what happens is, so what boils up in me is frustration.
right.
Frustration based, and so I imagine you and I are able to have a lucid conversation,
Mm.
and it's every time I mean like talk, it's an outlet, it's a valve that we can unload. But imagine like not being able to have any conversation really, but you have all these thoughts inside, and very often, I know Elon Musk said that he has Asperger's, which is
Hmm.
I'm not sure how the literature is, so I don't want to misstate anything, but I
Hmm.
believe it's a form of autism.
It
I don't.
is.
Okay, and
It's
he
more.
said.
It's more in the social spectrum.
Mhm. And he said that but he said that he just has thoughts in his head
Yes.
popping all the time, but he
Mhm.
has the outlet, he has the ability to express them and to realize them. So,
And look at the creativity from it.
right, right.
And you look at prodigies,
Oh,
piano and this and that, they're most certainly on the autism spectrum because, that sheer brilliance. There was a young guy in America's Got Talent last year that won,
mhm.
blind and autistic. But when he hit the piano and he started singing, he was channeling some of the greats. I mean, he ended up
Oh, it's
winning.
amazing, right?
And he opened up the world to autism altogether. Yes, he had quirky ways of behaving. His mum had to
Mhm,
be with him all the time. He was very, very childlike when he wasn't at that piano. But when
mhm.
he was at that piano, he was magical,
Right.
transformed completely. And this is the thing, that's their world. It's just in our world. And sometimes I look at our world and the way we treat each other. And I just kind of don't blame some people checking out and not wanting to interact with certain humans because some
You,
humans suck.
some where you're being more generous than I mean, no, you read my mind. Sometimes in a weird way. There's actually there's actually a little dialogue in the book where the older brother Thomas and the older sister Rebecca are kind of looking at Wes, who's sitting on a park bench, staring at his shoes, studying his hands, doing what autistic boys do and children do. And the brother says, in a way, I envy. He's never going to have to worry about this stuff. He's never going to have to think about. And looking back on it, I wish I had taken that dialogue further and said, and he's never going to have to know how crappy some people can be and how
Mm,
terrible some people can treat each other. In a way, he's living in his own world, his own dreamland,
yeah.
almost like Tommy from The Who, where he's
Yes.
basically living in a quiet vibration land. Was it say, strange as it seems, his musical dreams ain't quite so bad, right? And that's
Right.
from the album. And so there was almost a bit of envy in that, and you can understand why, just because they don't go by our rules and our modes of behavior. I mean, unless you're self-destructive.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, I mean, I love that phrase. Maybe we should get into their world a little bit, and that's a bit of what the book's about. Is
Mm-hmm.
the family is almost compelled to get into his world, and there is a vehicle through which they can see the world through it, and that's his
Right.
writing, and that kind of makes a huge
And
difference.
how many
And
similarities there are between,
oh, right.
I mean, yes, we look at our veterans, and as I said, I've interviewed some incredible veterans. One of
Mhm.
them, Bobby Henline, interviewed him 3 times. The Hummy blew up. Everybody died in there but
Oh,
him. He was burnt down to his skull,
oh, that's
lost
horrible.
part of his
That's
arm,
horrible.
but he decided to become a comedian as a way of dealing with
Right,
his own post-traumatic stress, and an incredible man. And he openly admits, I have issues. He has a dog with him all
right.
the time, and he has bad days and good days. But it's a question of a choice. And another young lady I interviewed was in a plane crash, burnt 65% over her body,
Oof,
over
oof.
100%. 100 operations. She was actually on America's Got Talent, came back for the
Really?
champion one. And, back in the day, they wouldn't have let somebody who was physically disfigured
Right,
come on earth. And this shows
right.
how far we've become in accepting that people are different. And like, she's
Mhm.
got the same dreams and the same passions and the same everything as she had as a young girl, and singing was what saved her life. But she has had numerous operations, and you can see the disfigurement. There is no hiding it.
Right.
But when she sings, the heart and soul came out.
Mhm.
When Bobby was sharing his story, the heart and soul comes out. You don't see the disfigurement anymore. And I think
No,
if we could stop looking at people as the label and start looking at them from the inside out, the heart, soul, and spirit of them, we would
right.
actually see how wonderful they really are, and be there more to be more compassionate and understanding and supportive of them.
Oh, right. And that's why I wanted to get inside the head a little bit. And
Yeah.
I didn't, I originally just started writing the book as just, almost autobiographical, as just my
Mm,
experiences. It was, in a way, the original book that I written was more Thomas, the
mm,
older brother, who is very much like me in many ways. I mean,
mm,
but I was like, there isn't enough here. I want to, I need somebody more astute, somebody who can really do a deep dive into this family and what's going on and watch it. But, then I thought, well, I could have a visiting relative. I'm like, no, that's cliche.
mm,
And then so many of my friends have autistic children.
mm.
So many of them. Oh, just to backtrack, it's like part of the reason also what has interested me in it is when I was in high school, after my father passed, one of the things I did was for the honor society. I started volunteer work somewhere, but then it became actually my job, which was I taught phys ed at a place in Palatine, Illinois called Little City for the Mentally Handicapped,
Mhm.
where we taught children who were, well, I don't want to say children, some of them were in their 40s, but from the profound, with the terminology of the day, was profoundly retarded
Mhm.
to mild to just Down syndrome who were married and were mechanics
Right,
and everything like that and
right.
everything in between. I understand autism and that is not the same, but again, I was able to experience the world through at least through observationally through how other people look at it. And my first thought was these are wonderful people. They
Yes.
really truly and there was a childlike innocence
Yeah.
to them, but they also had an adult mind in a way as well. It's hard to explain. It's almost like a different way of looking at things that I couldn't quite put my finger on. But I'm like, there was both childish innocence, and yet every now and then some wisdom would pop through because they have lived a long life. Some of these
Yes.
people, they have lived a long time, and so I really became affectionate towards them. And I can still see them now. And so I've always been interested again, just in the outsider, and it just seems like it's driven. I and sometimes I'm awkward in social situations. I'm a much better writer than a speaker, for example, except for when I'm talking like in a conversation like this.
Mhm.
And it's I think there's a lot of us out
I
there,
think,
and
in a lot of ways too, I live with an elderly lady, 88. She can outrun me.
mhm,
She's got so much stamina, and she's 5'11" and,
Mhm.
black belt and still believes she can
Wow.
throw somebody over her shoulder. The other day, somebody dropped the leash at the dog and the dog went running off something. She went running down 3 blocks and caught the dog. And people clapping along the way. And she said, "But why didn't they step on the leash and stop the dog?"
Right.
No, they were
Stop
just having
clapping.
her
Right.
chasing them, right? But her short-term memory is deplorable. It's really, really bad. But her childlike enthusiasm over
Mhm.
Christmas, over events, over this and that. We recently went to her hometown, Montreal. She wanted to see it before she died, and she couldn't wait to show me everything. And like she
Oh, that's
tried to
great.
do it all in one day, and then finally said she was tired. And I'm like, yes,
Finally, right.
because I
Good,
was
because I'm
exhausted.
exhausted.
Yeah,
Good.
but the enthusiasm that she has for life, and she had polio when she was young.
Oh,
Her
really?
twin
Wow.
sister died. Her fiance was killed 4 days before the wedding. She's known
Oh my
suffering,
gosh.
right? She's
Yeah.
known suffering, but she's chosen to look at the happy things in life. And I
Yeah.
think when you look very much at Down syndrome or autism and certainly other levels, I'm not talking about the extreme when they have other issues as well,
Right. Right. Right.
but they do choose. They do choose to live in a
Hmm.
happy state. I don't want to feed the negative. I don't see the
Right.
negative. I'm just being happy. And I think there's a lot for us to learn from that because we get bogged down so much with, as you said, the dent in the car, and we get pissed off with somebody treading on our toes or somebody butting in line, and
Mhm.
and we get angst over the simplest of things. And it's like, that's on us.
That is
What
on
that
us.
person did was wrong, but our reaction is up to us. And if
Yep.
we're getting worked up, maybe we just need to bring it down a notch, because who is that serving?
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think one upside, maybe perhaps there are more to dealing with tragedy, and I'm sure you can speak to this as well, with your situation with your own father.
Mhm.
One upside is that I think once you've experienced something like that, it puts perspective
Mhm.
on the other things.
Yeah.
There's a couple, I mean, there's that old expression, don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all
Yes.
small stuff. I mean, it's
Mhm.
not all small stuff, but a lot of it is. And my favorite expression, and it was my father's too, ironically, is the Solomon, "This too shall pass."
Mhm.
And I always tell people, if you feel like you're in a bad spot or something like that, take a step back and just realize, number one, you're not going to be in this place forever.
Right.
It will pass. You will look back on this in the
Yes.
past and with the past tense at one point. That also goes for the good, so enjoy it. You
Yes.
know, the thing is that I think the thing that I learned, and you, no doubt you did as well, is that your life can change on a dime.
Mhm.
And right now, you and I are having a nice, healthy conversation. And not to sound morbid, but I could walk outside and have a life-changing event. Barry Shore is somebody I know. He's the ambassador of joy, and he basically one day woke up paralyzed from a
Mhm.
disease. Like, now, 2 days before that, he had no idea, and he spent years of his life trying just to learn how to walk again. I mean, it's not like he got hit by a car or anything like
No,
that.
no.
The point is that, man plans, God laughs. And so I
Yes.
think, and I think what we, and I think part of overcoming depression or overcoming anxiety, whatever it is realizing that, look, uh, where you are right now, there might be a point where you would give everything to be back in this place. So
Right.
enjoy it. So enjoy it,
I think it's
you
also,
know, and appreciate it.
what you feed grows. And,
Yeah.
from a person who suffers from depression too, and I
Mhm.
finally found the right medication, so I
Mhm.
don't go down the rabbit hole anymore.
Right.
But, when I went down the rabbit hole, if another person tells me to snap out of it, I'm going to get a punch in
Don't
the
you think you
nose,
want to? I'd say, don't you think I want to? But
Exactly. Oh,
it's
I
like,
chose to be miserable and
yeah,
feeling
right,
suicidal. Yeah, exactly.
right.
And
And
but we have to know, we don't always know what triggers us. I mean, literally we could wake up with it, but it's also trying to know, yes, finally found the right medication, but it's also, what do I know that helps me come out of it? Music is one. And music actually literally changes the frequency in your body.
mhm.
Right. So it doesn't matter what, with your favorite band or the words you hear, it's the music goes in and changes the frequency. Being of service, helping others, it lifts you up. It makes you feel that you're contributing. And I think a lot of the time when depression comes in and that despair comes in, because you don't feel worthy of anything. You don't feel that you should be living or anything. And I think
That you
going
have a purpose, right?
right. So I think if you step
Yeah.
into a purpose, step into helping other people, it's not going to snap you out of it, but it's certainly going to um, decrease, the
Mhm.
rabbit hole feeling until it does pass. Um,
Mhm.
and we've just got to make sure we don't feed it, that we actually do feed the things that we know, even if
Right.
it's a drip by drip, but the things that do help you come out of it.
Oh yeah, and I think also, I mean, I play music, so
Mhm.
that's very much a release for me.
Yeah.
But also, don't discount humor. Don't
No,
discount laughter.
no,
I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying,
no, no, but I'm
uh,
agreeing with you.
my,
Yeah.
my father, my father, my whole family I'm the youngest of five. They are literally the funniest group of people I've ever been with, and they have that gallows humor that you get from going through tragedy.
Hmm.
And I remember, and my mother was the best of them all. My mother, she knew how to laugh. Think about it, this woman, again, the mother in my book is, this woman in my book is much colder. My mother was a much warmer person,
Right.
so this she's probably the most fictional of all the characters.
Hmm.
Um, but, I remember New Year's Eve, 1983, that was the year my dad died. When the ball came down and we're like, Happy New Year, my mom took a drink and just kind of went and gave a raspberry to 1983 and laughed.
Yeah.
She's like, you know what? Well, that was terrible. Now let's get on to 1984.
Yeah.
And that was the way. And she ended up living. She just passed away at the age of almost not a couple days before her 91st birthday. She met somebody else. They traveled the world. She was an expert contract bridge player till the day she died. She could have sat at a table with Omar Sharif and Bill Gates. I mean, that's how good she was. She was physically debilitated because she had wet macular degeneration. So she was losing her eyesight and she couldn't move as much, but she never lost her mind, thank God. And she was a very pleasant person to be around. And when you think about it, if anybody has a right to feel sorry for
Yes.
themselves, it would be somebody like that. Somebody's husband leaves her in the prime of their life. They're getting ready to, he'd just gotten a promotion of all things. They're getting ready
Mm.
to move to a nice neighborhood and everything. And then he pulls the rug out from under her, and yet she recovered, and she lived a wonderful next 40 years of her life, 35 years of her life. So
But she was willing
you
to go
can
through
get
the
through it.
progress. Exactly. And you've got to be willing to go through the process. And,
Yes.
with some of the stories that I've heard here and doing these shows, I've done 2,000 shows now over the last 9 years. Some of the stories, it's like, I wouldn't blame you if you didn't get up in the morning. I
Right.
won't blame you if you exited with what you've been through.
Right.
But through is the word.
True.
They decided to go through it, to heal themselves by embracing their courage and their strength and their abilities, by releasing the pain from it. You never forget.
Right.
But if you can release the pain from it, and that pain that has that hold on you that just totally dictates your life, if you can release that pain, then they step into their meaningful purpose. And
Right.
they're now people who are there to help other people going through things because they can truly relate, and they're so relatable. But it's still that courage and strength to do that. And they will admit that, they have flashbacks, they have days, but they know,
Sure.
okay, just nurture yourself during that time, give yourself some love, and you'll be better tomorrow. And I think the forward thinking, we've all
Mhm.
had stuff happen to us, and it's we can go for, I did a show myself the other day where it was something that had happened to me, and before I could have the clarity of knowing what to do, I had to go through the emotions, the
Mhm.
anger, the upset, the this and that. I had to go through them to spend them, and then it was okay, that's released now, what do I do about it? And I could
Right.
see the clarity. And I think when anything happens to you, you must be willing to go through the emotions. You must be willing to go through the pain. You must be willing to go through the process. And then you come out to the other side and you can see more clearly. You feel different. You've got more strength and courage and abilities. And now you can take those steps forward no matter what's happened to you. But you've got to be willing to go through it.
Yeah. And you have no choice.
It's that or
Anymore.
crumble.
Right. You have, if you have to cross the river and it's a rushing river, you can't fly over it. So you have to go through it. I
Yes.
will say, I think the last several decades have been a bit of a golden age for understanding mental illness,
Mm,
which I'm very happy about.
yeah.
In a way, my age is an interesting age. I'm in my mid 50s, so I can remember a time before when people, I knew World War II veterans. I knew a
Mm,
lot of Korean War veterans,
mm,
and they were all like you had said with your father. They were just basically keep it inside, and
yes.
you could translate that to all different types of mental illness. Suck it up, Buttercup, or
Yeah.
stop whining,
Mm,
whatever. And there's some truth to a lot of that. Sometimes I think people are hyperbolic in their problems today. I
yes.
think in that respect, we've gone too much the other way, where
Yeah. They become
sometimes,
emotional about the
yeah,
emotions. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But when it comes to the actual serious diagnosable mental illness, which is a very real condition.
Hmm.
It's not just a flaw in character, as they used to call it.
Right.
The guy just can't hack it. I mean, I think we've become much more understanding, and it's like what you had said. We've seen that in the mushrooming of support groups, the mushrooming of understanding veterans. I remember, I think it was '83, whatever. I remember when they first had that parade for Vietnam veterans down in D.C., and that was like 8 or 9 years after the war was over. And for the first time, we were basically saying, we understand we appreciate what you guys went through. You didn't just come home and get dumped back. Yeah, you came home, you got dumped back into society, no support, nothing like that. You're just supposed to just go back and forget that all these things you saw never happened. And at least in my lifetime, I've seen us start to really embrace our veterans, and not just say thank you for your service, but also, can we help you? Can you,
Yes.
now, not
What
enough,
can
I
we
don't
now
think.
do for you?
Right.
Right.
Not enough, I
No.
don't think. And the interesting thing too now is that we also see a lot more wounded veterans coming back because
Yes.
medical care is so much better, and that's both a blessing and a curse. But we have a lot more wounded people now, especially head injuries, head
Mm.
wounds, and so I'm kind of getting off on a tangent, but
No,
it's a
I mean,
subject that I care about.
yeah, no, it's a subject
Yeah,
I care about too. Again, with all the
yeah.
people that I've interviewed there, and it's there was one that stayed with me, and he was a Vietnam vet, and he said that he didn't want to go to war. He was drafted.
Hmm.
He was part of the machinery, like when they had to go make roads and things.
Hmm.
And he said he was driving this big truck, and there was a young boy there with a grenade,
Yeah.
and he knew that this kid would blow himself up to stop them moving forward. And he had the gun on the kid. And he said, I didn't sign up for this. I
No,
cannot
exactly.
kill a kid. And
Exactly.
fortunately, the kid kind of threw the grenade and ran.
Hmm.
Um, but he said he came back from the war and he was ashamed of being in the Vietnam War. He burnt his uniform. He didn't tell anybody he'd
Hmm.
been in there. And he went on, had a very successful business. And it's only after he sold the business that he had downtime that suddenly the stress caught up with him. And suddenly all the
Hmm.
flashbacks came to him. And, suddenly the whole thing about it, because he couldn't come back and talk to anyone about it because there was so much
Right.
anti-Vietnam going on, and he didn't even want to be there in the first place. So there was no talking about it. And it had just sat there all his life until it had to come out. And this is the thing, you cannot avoid
No, you can't.
whoever you are, whether it's post-traumatic stress, whether you're a vet or not, you cannot avoid. You have to face that issue face on, because if you don't, it will eat you up.
Oh, absolutely. And I think in my case, it's behind me is my
Yes,
therapy.
yes.
And every one of my family members has dealt with things differently, and everybody deals with things differently. So this is the way I deal with it: is I kind of internalize it and then I spit it out in a work of fiction. Um, but yeah, that's why he came back from Korea in 1952, I believe, and took 31 years for it to finally
Yeah.
get a hold of him. So you're right. It's like I don't know if it's like a ticking time bomb so much as just sort of a seeping pathogen that just keeps
Yeah.
growing and growing, and who knows what triggers it. And again,
Yes.
that's something I can't understand, because the most frustrating part about it is, same with dealing with autistic children, is you're not them.
No.
So you can only try to be sympathetic and to be supportive
And
and to try
gentle.
and gentle, right?
I think
And
the beautiful thing about autistic children or Down syndrome children is the gentility. They're not
mhm,
into aggression. And I do know someone who has a daughter who has autism and a few other things, and you have to watch what she eats. She eats all the time. She has
Hmm.
to have the TV on, the computer on, the music on, and and she gets very angry. It can be quite dangerous.
Right.
Um, but
Right.
she hasn't got just autism. She has numerous other spectrums
Hmm.
on there as well. But for the most part, most autistic people, it is really kind of the social navigation, the focus on what they can do, and they're gentle people, and they don't want aggression, and they don't want
Right.
that negativity around them. And somebody who is suffering from post-traumatic stress, they don't want it either. They've
Right.
already got it internally. They don't need it externally. So love and compassion goes a long way.
Well, yeah. I mean, the essence of what I wrote is about how love sort of gets the family to the other side. And I mean, without love, there really is no other. You know, you don't. I mean, in my in my belief, it's the love of God. It's the love. That's another thing too. That don't discount faith to get you through it, because if you
Yeah,
believe God has a reason for you to live, and for example, I mean, if my father passes away, but maybe I write something because of that prevents several other people from going over the edge, or something like that. Who knows? We can't we can't try to make sense of everything. Sometimes you just have to go through it and just
right,
and say to yourself, there but for the grace of God I go.
right.
And I'm not going to let this get to me. I'm going to, like you said, I'm going to process it. I'm going to get to the other side, and then let's see where life goes. And who knows, it could be an adventure again.
Exactly.
And
And it might not be for the person who is thinking suicidal, because sometimes I'm not suicidal. It's
right.
something that overcomes them. But sometimes, these kind of stories are for the survivors, for the
Hmm.
people who have gone through, because, you've gone through a trauma too. You're going through the guilt, you're going through, but what if I'd done this? So, why
Right.
wasn't I enough? And why didn't I see it? All the whys, right? And
Right.
you're going to ask yourself those questions, but stop beating yourself up. Now you have to go through the healing process.
Right.
Ultimately, we all make our own choices. Where those choices come from, it's up to us. And his came from a troubled mind, a
Right.
mind that just could not take it anymore. And it's, I don't blame them, because if you can't
No.
take it anymore, there is no other way out. As you said, if you take a pill or do something to harm yourself, and you left the door open, that's a cry for help. You
Right.
can't take it anymore, you need help. But when somebody actually succeeds with it, it's like the
Right.
only way out of this is exiting. And this, you know, um, as far as I'm concerned, God does not look at suicide as a sin.
I don't
It
believe
is
any more than they would look at getting cancer, in my mind. You
exactly,
know,
because it is for someone to take their own life. As you said, we're here and willing, doing everything we can to survive and thrive. For someone to actually find the courage to take their life, it is whether it's momentary or whether it's something planned. There was another show I did of a guy who talked about his father who had a debilitating disease, and it would have meant that he would have become a vegetable. And he didn't want to do that to his family. He didn't want
right.
this slow death. He didn't want to put his family through it. He went and booked himself into a hotel, and he went into the parking lot to kill himself because he didn't want to leave a mess in the hotel. And he left a
Right.
complete letter and everything for everyone. This was my choice to exit this way. I'm
Hmm.
not willing to go for the pain and suffering. I'm not willing for you to go for the pain and suffering.
Right.
Now, that took a lot of courage to do, right?
And selflessness when you think about
Yes,
it. You know,
yes.
I think it was John Eastman, Eastman Kodak. I think it was him who had realized that he had contracted the same disease that he watched his mother slowly die of,
Mm,
debilitating. And so he took his own life. And I think his note said, "I have accomplished all I want to accomplish. Why wait?"
right.
What he was doing was he was preventing his family from
Yeah,
the pain and suffering that he saw through, because there was an inevitability to it.
exactly. There was
It's
no
one
way out.
thing,
There was
yeah,
no solution to this. There
yeah,
was
it's
a,
one thing, if you're recovering from an injury and say, I just don't want
yeah,
to deal with it, but no. And, but like I always, the key, I think, to getting through a lot of difficult situations, this is my way of viewing things, is I always try to imagine myself, okay, where am I going to be 3 years from now?
Yeah.
All I know is this. This will be 3 years in the past. I'll be talking about this in the past tense. And I'll be saying, boy, that was terrible. But now it's over.
Yeah.
I think what happens is people are incapable of seeing beyond the corner. I mean,
Right.
it will get better. I mean, unless, like you said,
Yeah.
unless it's, Lou Gehrig's disease or something like that. And
Exactly.
that's a different,
If
but
it's
that's a
an
different
end,
mind. Yeah.
there is no other ending but,
Right. Right.
you're just expediting it. But,
Right.
I know for me that, I've had a few things in my life that haven't been pleasant. And every time I come up to an obstacle and it's like, and it becomes overwhelming, all I have to do is stop and remember, look back, look what you've overcome.
Yep.
Look where you used to be. That
Yep.
was far worse than where you are now. You're right.
Look, life is, I mean, it sounds, like a platitude, but it's, some are true,
Yeah.
and one of them is that there is no such thing as a smooth life. Life is up and downs. One of my favorite scenes is in the movie Parenthood. If you ever saw it with Steve
Mhm.
Martin.
Yeah.
But I love the grandmother, and they were talking about the ups and downs of raising children, but you can apply it to life. And then she said when she was a little girl, her husband, future husband, took her to the carnival, and she said they went on the roller coaster. She says up down. She said up down. She didn't realize that a ride could be so exhilarating, so frightening, so traumatic, and yet so fulfilling. She said some people like the merry-go-round
Yeah.
because that just went around and around, nothing. She said I like the roller coaster. You get more out of it.
Right.
And life is, look, a life lived is going to be a life of ups and downs.
Yes.
A life existed is going to be a life where you neither accomplish anything nor do you face anything. I mean, you can live yourself. You can live in a bubble if you want, but that's not living. I mean, and the fact of the
But
matter is,
we've got to understand that, autistic people or sensitive people,
mhm,
because there's many sensitives out there, that Ferris wheel is okay.
for them it
It's,
is. Yeah.
like even what they see at the top, if it's something that transforms something, that brings out a creativity, but it's gentle instead of bouillon, bouillon, because they can't take that. They can't take the extremes,
Right.
right?
I'm
So
talking about, I was just talking about
regular people, but
the
yeah,
ords, if you
we've
will.
got to be willing. We've got to be willing to be uncomfortable at times, because it's during that uncomfortability or those challenges that we actually find our creativity
Yep, absolutely.
and our
And
strength and our courage.
and it's and I would imagine being autistic every day is a challenge. I mean,
Mhm.
Wes basically talks about how the world seems to assault him every day.
Right.
He's and so I mean, when you're faced with challenges, you do extraordinary things, and he's doing in his own way an extraordinary thing, which is basically cataloging in great detail and with great astuteness and depth and intellectual understanding the struggles of his family that he's watching all around him. And so in a way, that's his way of passing through it,
Right.
and I hope I captured the language of that well enough, but I'll let readers decide. But I'm happy with the book, I must say. It
Well,
was
I
a
really
labor.
love the
Yeah,
fact that you've put the two of them together, because, we all see things on autism and on post-traumatic stress, but we don't realize very often they do go together.
absolutely.
You have an autistic child. There's a few people I've interviewed where the fathers left because
Hmm.
they couldn't deal with
Yeah,
the child, right? And there's that trauma there of a parent leaving, and then the parent that's left behind. So the thing is, we're all going to face a trauma along the way, but according to who we are is how we're going to cope with it. And I
yep.
think we, as quote the normals, ha
The
ha ha,
ords, the ords. Yeah.
yeah, the ordinaries, need to be a lot more sensitive to other people's feelings and other people's ways of dealing with things. And if we're that with compassion and a willingness to understand, we won't be leaving people out in the
Right.
cold where they're feeling that there's no way out.
And also believing that they have something to teach us.
Yes, and they
Because
all,
when you look at the world from a different perspective, I always say that my favorite books are books that other people recommend to me. And the reason is because I get out of my comfort zone and I get out of my, my rut of this is my genre, this is what I like to read. And I'm like, okay, I'll try that book. I've never read, I've never read this author before or
Yeah.
whatever. And you find you're like, wow, there's a lot of insight in here that I never would have been exposed to. And basically what you're doing is you're opening yourself up to somebody else's view of the world, of what is good literature, what is a good book, what is good writing.
Yes.
And I think that's really how you learn. I mean, you can't learn in an echo chamber. You just to hear
Oh,
yourself, and
how boring.
it's boring. Well, it's
Yeah.
also it's intellectually limiting too. You're basically corralling yourself into a narrow viewpoint, and I think that's part of what's happening in the world right now. And I think
Mm,
why there's so much animosity in the world is because, and part of it is social media. Like
mm,
social media is a wonderful thing because we were able to have this conversation. You're in
yeah.
Nova Scotia, I'm in New Jersey. This is fantastic. This is unheard of. Even 20 years ago, really, although
Right.
we'd be on the phone.
Yes.
So that's wonderful. But at the same time, as you know, the algorithms kind of serve to corral people into their own world, because the more people say what you want to hear, the more you click on it. The more you
Yeah.
click on it, the more they put with people who want to. And all of a sudden, whereas before, when you had conversations with people and, oh, this guy had this view, this person had this view, now you're starting almost like a cell that's dividing apart,
Hmm.
and you can't understand each other. And you can't, then it comes to the point where there's only one way of looking at the world, and
Yeah.
that's your way. And that's how wars start. I hate to
Right.
say, you know,
Exactly.
and
That's where
that's how
hate
human
stems
conflict
from,
starts.
right?
Yeah, and so that concerns me.
Yeah.
And so again, if I can keep writing things where I myself am forced to look at the world through somebody else's eyes, that's good for me. And if it sells books, great. But even if not, it's certainly it's a much better way of spending my time.
Exactly.
So, and I
I'm
get to meet
I'm
people like you, which
right.
is
And
fantastic.
I get to interview people like you because of
Sure.
it. And I'm a true colors coach, the 4 key personality traits.
Hmm.
And if we've all got those personalities in us, they're just in different degrees. There's generally one that leads us and others that are up and down according to our lifestyle and experiences. But I feel that in any group there should always be the 4 perspectives, because if everybody shares their perspective, you have a broader view
Hmm.
instead of a narrow view. And it's like they're right, you're right. But
Right.
how can you find a common ground where you can agree? And you can only do that by looking at each other's perspectives. And the more you're willing to learn those perspectives, the better understanding you're going to have.
Well, I have found, I do a lot of writing, and I have found that uh, what I thought was right, when I thought I was absolutely right, somebody will bring up a new perspective, a new argument, or even new evidence or something like that. And I'll be like, wow, I was totally wrong about that. Uh,
Exactly. The
and
willingness to be wrong.
willingness to be wrong, because that's how you learn, right? I mean,
Yes,
it's the old Thomas Edison, right? He said, I didn't fail 1,000 times making the light bulb. I just learned 1,000 ways how not to make a light bulb, right? And
exactly.
and I do hope that people will open their hearts to other people's ideas and other people's minds, and like you said, other people's experiences and view of the world, and not judge them, but
Yeah.
and I'm not even saying you have to embrace them, but at least
No.
understand them and realize that your way it's not your way or the highway. There
Right.
are other people on this planet, 7 billion of them at last count or so, and each one of them has their own story to tell you. Each one of them has their own ups and downs, their own struggles, and it's a wonderful tapestry of the human condition. And I just hope people stop fighting with each other so much.
I'm
You
the
know,
old adage, give love a chance. Hate
it's
doesn't belong. It,
that's
it
right.
is so uncreative. It is so unproductive.
Hmm.
And it is so soul and heart and spirit
Yeah,
destroying.
yeah,
So,
and it's genuine.
and yeah, exactly.
So,
The other book, tell us a little bit about your other book you have there behind you.
oh, that's it's called Of Another Time and Place. I'm also a World War II buff,
Hmm.
history buff, and this is a book about it's a totally different type of book, but it's also first person. It's about a young man growing up in Nazi Germany as the Germans come to power, and it's told in hindsight. It's told in flashback, and it's about a young man who wants to be a concert pianist growing up in this little Bavarian village, which was a village that I passed through when I was in Germany. I fell in love with it, so I'm like, I got to write about this.
Hmm.
And he he sort of tells the story of how he goes from being a sort of just a happy-go-lucky boy in Germany wanting to play piano And by 1942, he's flying in a fighter plane
Mm.
over the Western Front. And it's about him coming back from his leave from war, and he was actually going to get the Iron Cross from Hitler, and his fiance, who is 2 years older and infinitely more aware of the world and aware of the Nazis and what they're doing. He's one of these guys who's not he's not pro-Nazi and he's not anti-Nazi. He was one of
Right.
that gray area that was
Yeah.
in many ways the more dangerous, because
Mm.
they
There's no
kind of went with the
conviction.
flow, right? Like
Yeah.
his younger brother's a diehard Hitler Youth, but his fiance is like, this man's terrible. He's going to kill us all. And
Right.
anyway, long story short, he comes home and he discovers that she's hiding his piano teacher in her attic, and she's been doing that for 2 years, and she wants him to fly them out. And that's sort of that's sort of the skeleton of the story. So Schindler's List meets 12 O'Clock High, but the underlying story is a study of how how they can go from how do you get from Beethoven to Auschwitz? How
Mm.
does this happen? And it
Mm.
happens gradually, and it happens when people are willing to hear certain things. And so it really is sort of a story of him observing, again, as now he's also an outsider, and because he's this little concert pianist. He's not in the Hitler Youth. He just does his own thing. He's the only one who associates with the town Jews because they teach him music. He doesn't think of
Right.
it like
Yeah.
and but even he starts to anti-Semitism starts to seep into him until he goes to war and sees what the war is really about. And
Right.
then he meets Hitler and sees what he's about. And he's like, he has a moral catharsis and realizes that he's got to get these people out of here. But there's a lot to it. It explains, I'm very happy with it as well, because I think it gives people a good perspective of what life was like in Germany going through and into the war. And it's a love story as much as a war story. And the best compliment I got was a friend of mine's parents were from Germany. They became professors in the United States. They're in their 90s now. And they read the book, and they just happened to be in town one day, and they wanted to meet me. And I was wondering, why did they want to? I thought they were going to read me the riot act for getting it all wrong. And they said, how long did you live in Germany? And I said, I never lived in Germany, but I've traveled there. My family's German, Bavarian. And they said, this basically reminds us exactly of what life was like. That's amazing. They lived outside of Berlin, and they used to watch the bombers go overhead and
Mm.
bombing Germany, but they said this is what it was like. And that to me was worth
Yes.
a thousand sales on Amazon,
Right.
or whatever.
Exactly.
That to me was, and so I was, so these are the two books I've published. I've written more, and I have a wonderful agent named Bob Thixton at Pinder Lane, Garen Brook, and they used to represent John Grisham as well. So I'm very lucky about that.
Mm.
And great publishers, who've really taken, they've basically believe in me, which I'm very grateful for. And so hopefully I'll have some more coming out.
Good.
But all of them are about sort of outsiders.
Mm.
Now that I think about it, it's funny. This is
Yeah.
like a therapy session. I didn't really think much about this till I talked to you, and I'm like, oh God, okay, now I get it. Now I get that's the common theme, But
Did you see the movie The Book Thief?
I did not. No, I've never.
Oh, see that. See
The
that.
book thief?
The Book
Are you
Thief.
calling me a thief? I'm
No,
kidding.
no, no.
I'm
The
joking.
Book
I'm
Thief is
joking.
actually about a kid who kind of steals the book that all the Nazis are burning. And it is
Oh,
about them, German people who didn't want to be part of the war, but if they
mhm.
weren't, they were considered the enemy, and how they
Sure.
protect a Jewish person.
Oh,
So
really? Okay.
a beautiful story,
Yeah.
amazing
Well,
movie.
one of the more difficult scenes to write in terms of painful was as the character Harmon Becker becomes a captain in the Luftwaffe, but he's getting ready to go off to the training school for to learn to fly, and so he goes and visits his piano meister, whose whose shop was destroyed during Kristallnacht. He was actually in He was actually in the shop when it happened. Harmon was watching the store, so he was there when it all happened, and so he goes and he basically says, "Listen, I have to go. I'm going to visit. I'm going to. Excuse me. I'm going off to war. Um, you and I can't associate anymore." Is what he tells me. He's like, "Wait a minute. I've been teaching piano for 5 years." And he just says, "You don't understand what's happening in this country now. In fact, you've got to get out of here."
Yeah.
And the tragic part is that he says, "Look, I'm a German. My religion is Jewish, but I'm
Yes,
German."
yes.
And he points to a star and he says, "I refuse to believe that the people who gave us Beethoven Goethe, Bach
Mm.
also did this. He goes, I believe in Germany. He goes, then he guy says, then you're a fool because this is not the Germany that you know. You've got to get out of here. And that's so part of his when he hears about them, he's frustrated because he's like, I told them to get out. So he's
Yeah.
angry at first,
Yeah.
but then he realizes, he's got to do something.
Yeah.
So, but it was
The
interesting to
conscious
see.
caught up.
Yeah, but it was interesting to see how a German becomes a Jew,
Yes.
no longer a German. And that's, unfortunately, human nature is
That's the
universal.
horrors of war and segregation. And
Yep.
we see it so much going on in America right now. And,
Yep.
here in Canada.
Tribalization.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just that as we all bleed the same. We are all part of the human race.
Right.
I think at this time, 2021, that we should be getting over the difference of skin or the difference of
I
race, of the
could not
difference of
agree more.
sexuality. Let us grow up, folks. The
Yeah.
world, the planet is in trouble because of us humans. And if we can't get along, and if we can't pull our resources, if we can't step up, there's not going to be a planet to accommodate us anyway. So, it's time for us to wake up and start being nice to one another and just stop the white, black, pink, yellow, this,
Thank
that
you.
race. I'm just
Exactly.
totally
Why
over
would
it.
why would you teach people to hate each other when there's no group of people, no society has ever survived when when the tribalism kicks in, and you start to go to this line or that line.
Yeah.
Once that happens, society falls apart. And
Yes.
unfortunately, Plato, I think it was Plato, but somebody said it wasn't him, but whoever said it said, only the dead have seen the end of war.
Mm.
I'd like to think that that doesn't have to be, but
We can have a death of entitlement, a death of opulence. We can have a death of nonchalance, a death of judgment. We can have a death of those things and have a rebirth of a conscience where we can look at each other, heart, spirit, and soul, and say, I love your differences, autism. I love your differences, post-traumatic
yep.
stress. I love the differences of your opinion. They
Hmm.
ignite me, they open up my mind, they help me see things differently. Why can't we embrace the expansion of it instead of the limitation of hate?
I don't know, because powerful people know that exploitation is the best way to get power, which is
Power and
story
money.
as old as mankind itself.
Yeah,
That's
power and
that's what
money.
that's what this book, Another Time and Place, is all about. A
Hmm.
guy just pitting people against each other just to get in power, and you saw how well that worked out.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
exactly.
so
And, he was a very insecure man
to
himself,
say the least.
but
Yeah.
he could talk, he could rally, and that's the thing. So yeah, it's why don't we learn from our past? I don't understand,
Well, you have to study it first to learn from it, and that's
Right.
something I would like us to
Yes.
do a little bit more too. But that's another topic.
My
So,
brother is an author, and he wrote a book called The Repercussions of Thomas D. And it's about a young boy, teenager, that goes through a black hole while he's on the phone with his girlfriend and ends up in 1943 or
oh,
44
really? Oh, that's
war.
interesting.
And because he's got this thing, he gets thrown into jail and he ends up talking to somebody, telling them all about the future. And this person is a spy working for
Hmm.
Churchill, who is actually a German spy, and it changes the war completely. And I thought he wrote it for teenagers because, like, if they came into power, no cell phones, no computers, no this
Hmm.
regimented life, and it was like a wake-up call, to them of bringing kind of the past and the present together. But it was really food for thought because it's like, what if? What if? Right? All the
What if?
sacrifices that the people made to fight for our survival. Not only should we be in gratitude, but what if we could actually negotiate instead of kill? You know?
Well, I have a little bit of hope because there's my daughter she graduated college and she's going on to she wants to be a doctor but she also studies psychology. She actually helped me a little bit with the book as well to understand autism. And there's a movie you can see it on YouTube. I believe it's called Growing Up Six or Growing Up Seven in America. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
No, no, look
It's
for it.
it's an old movie. It's about 20 years old or so, narrated by Meryl Streep.
Hmm.
And what it does is it takes a bunch of 7-year-old, I think I want to say seven. So bunch of 7-year-old kids from all different strata of the United States. There's like some poor minority children from the Robert Taylor homes in Chicago, where I grew up in Chicago, and these were the worst projects. They're gone now. They raised them, but they were just horrible, right? Crime ridden and everything. And then they have some very wealthy children from the Upper West Side. They got some Southern children from more of a Baptist family, and they all just kind of explain, and it's just interviews with these children and how they see the world.
Yeah.
And all of them are such wonderful children. You know, they're not, there's no hatred in their eyes, they're in their voices. And then at the end, they all have like a little party together, and they're all playing together, and there's no color,
No.
there's no race,
No.
they're just a bunch of kids. And so when I see that movie actually changed my viewpoint a lot for the better, I think. And if your viewers ever watch, it's called Growing Up 7 America. You can pull it up on YouTube. And
I will definitely look it
it's
up.
it's a wonderful thing. And but what it tells you is that hatred is taught.
Yes.
It is not, you know, and
it's not
and
innate in us.
Distrust of the other is taught.
Yes.
You know,
racism is taught.
It's taught,
yes.
which means it doesn't have to be taught, which means there is hope. And as we learn more about people, and as we become, I'd like to think, more sophisticated, certainly in our knowledge, I'd like to think that those feelings will go away. But who knows? You know, the human heart and evil is quite strong. So
right. Well, you know, while we're busy pointing fingers at other people, saying it's
oh,
their fault.
Listen,
no, I'm not saying you, but I'm saying people. You know, that race, that person, that the.
Oh, I thought you meant being judgmental.
There's three people coming back. There's three fingers coming back at us.
Right.
Is that we are responsible for our own perception. We are responsible for our own actions, our own interactions. And what we put out is what we're going to get back. So if you're spewing hate, you're going to get hate back. You're going to ignite hate. If you actually put out love and compassion, you are going to feed that love and compassion. You're going to make that love and compassion grow. So it all comes down to our choice.
What's Newton's third law, right? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Exactly.
And no, I thought you meant that I was pointing at other people for being bad. Like we all have sins.
No. I'm just saying we've all
got being on a high horse.
We you know, because we do that because we want to blame someone else instead of taking responsibility ourselves. And if we start looking into ourselves and our own reactions without blame, without shame, and go, okay, has society dictated that I behave in this way? And now we're looking at social media being a very big platform for dictating. And, you know, at some point we have to take onus and responsibility for our actions, because Facebook didn't make you do it. So-and-so didn't make you do it. You made that choice. You may have made that choice on bad information, but you still did that action, and you've got to own it.
Oh, I agree with that. Starts with personal responsibility.
Yes.
You know, it starts with you change the world from the bottom up, not the top down.
And from the inside out.
Yep, I agree.
So,
well, we didn't have much to fight about.
Exactly. And you know, when you go back to the post-traumatic stress and the autism, what is the one thing they don't want? No more fighting.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So, you know, they want peace, they want equilibrium, they want to be able to get on with their lives in that sense of peace without the fight anymore, without the horrors anymore. So on that note, how do people get the book and how do people reach you?
Well, okay, the book, you can get it on anywhere, as they say, any place where fine books are sold, mostly online at the moment, which seems to be, you know, a modern trend. So you can go on Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com. You can go on the Simon & Schuster website and just type in Brad Schaeffer, and you'll see both of my books. And little synopsises of each of them. I have a website, BradSchaefferAuthor.com, which you can go onto. I also have a Facebook site, which I welcome people to get on. And if you message me, I'll talk to you. I mean, I've no problem talking to people about my books and anything like that. So I think I'm on Instagram. I have to check with my publicist on that. I'm a little old for that, you know.
Right, yeah, it's not my favorite platform. It's not so interactive.
I'm on LinkedIn as well, but that's more of a business platform. But Facebook, Amazon.com, and like I said, the Simon & Schuster website, you'll find me.
Will you please spell your name for people who are just listening, so they can?
SCHAEFFER.
So it's bradschaefferauthor.com.
Yes.
And the book is
BradSchaefferAuthor.com.
yeah,
Yep.
and it's The Extraordinary by Brad Schaeffer. You can look it up on Amazon. And the other book is,
Of Another Time and Place.
and they can also find that on Amazon.
Yes, they can. So this was great. I really appreciate it.
I thank you for putting those two subjects together, because they're two very important subjects. They're ones that we can't avoid. They're very much there. It's not going away. We can't make these people think like we do. They don't because of circumstances. And it is time that we had more compassion and entered their world and realized too that they don't need the turbulence. They need the
Agreed.
peace. So let's be the peace that they need. And let's learn from them. There's a lot to be learned from them. And if we open up to listening, we will learn a great deal about ourselves and our own choices as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Brad. This has been great.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Remember, folks, there's a lot to learn from other people that you call minorities. They're not a minority. They're there to teach us. They're the indigo kids, our autism kids. And those that are going through post-traumatic stress, we need to be there in gratitude for the sacrifice that they've gone through, but also learn the compassion and support that they need now. It's time for us to step up in every way. Until next time, bye for now. We hope that you enjoyed the show. You will hear many, many shows here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. We have new shows for you out every week. Just find them on our podcast or What's New. If you feel that you have something to share that makes a difference in the lives of others, or you too feel that you could be a host, please contact me at info@selfdiscoverymedia.com and we will be glad to speak with you. Have a wonderful day.